There's a specific kind of person who can walk into a room full of people and feel like they arrived in the wrong story. Not unwelcome, not rejected, just slightly misaligned. Like everyone else received a version of reality that makes sense to them and yours came with missing pages. You can hold conversations, you understand what's being said, you even know how to respond. But underneath it, there's a quiet, persistent awareness you don't quite belong here. And what's strange is, it doesn't just happen in one place, it happens everywhere. Different rooms, different people, different stages of your life, school, work, friend groups, even sometimes with your own family. And after enough repetitions, a question starts forming in the background. Is it them or is it me? Most people eventually settle somewhere. They find their group, their environment, a place that feels natural. But for you, that sense of arrival never fully comes, just variations of the same experience. Closer, further, but never quite home. And if you felt this long enough, you've probably come to a quiet conclusion about yourself, that something about you is off. Not wrong in an obvious way, just incompatible in a way that's hard to explain. But what if that feeling, that constant sense of being slightly out of place, isn't a flaw? What if it's actually a signal? Not that you don't belong anywhere, but that your brain was never designed to belong in the same way most people do. To understand this, you have to start with something simple. Belonging for most people is not something they consciously build. It's something they recognize: shared humor, shared values, shared assumptions about how the world works. When enough of those align, the nervous system relaxes. You don't have to think about how to exist, you just do. But for some people, that automatic recognition doesn't happen as easily. And when researchers began studying individuals who report chronic feelings of not belonging, not socially isolated, not rejected, just consistently out of sync, they found something interesting. These individuals tend to score higher in a cluster of traits related to pattern sensitivity and cognitive independence. In simpler terms, your brain isn't just participating in the environment, it's observing it. Constantly noticing subtle inconsistencies, unspoken dynamics, the gap between what people say and what they actually mean. And once you start seeing those patterns, something changes. Because belonging depends in part on a kind of unconscious agreement with the environment, a willingness to move with it without analyzing it too closely. But when your awareness stays active, that agreement becomes harder. You're not just inside the moment, you're also watching it, and that creates distance. Not dramatic, not visible, but enough to feel. This is where most explanations stop. They frame this as overthinking or social anxiety or introversion, but that's only part of it, because what's happening underneath is more structural. Your brain is prioritizing coherence over connection. Most people will adapt themselves slightly to fit the room. They adjust tone, behavior, even opinions, often without realizing it. It's efficient. It maintains social harmony. But if your internal system is calibrated differently, that adjustment doesn't happen automatically, or when it does, it feels noticeable, artificial, like you're editing yourself in real time, and that creates a subtle friction. You can participate, but you can't fully dissolve into it. There's also something happening at the level of identity. For many people, identity is built through affiliation. I'm part of this group. I belong to this culture. I align with these people. It's externally anchored. But for people who feel out of place everywhere, identity often forms differently. Less from where you belong, more from what you observe. You build yourself from internal references, experiences, reflections, questions that never quite settle. Which makes your identity more stable in one way, but less compatible in another. Because when identity isn't anchored to a group belonging becomes optional. And optional things don't automatically feel like home. There's another layer to this, and it's quieter. Earlier in life, there were likely moments, not always dramatic, where you realized something subtle. That fitting in required you to ignore something you could see clearly. Maybe it was a contradiction, a behavior that didn't match the words, a dynamic that didn't feel right. And while others moved past it easily, you didn't. Not because you wanted to be different, but because once you see something clearly, you can't unsee it. So instead of adapting, you stepped back slightly, not enough for anyone to notice, but enough to create distance. And over time, those small distances add up until they become your default position. From the outside, this can look like detachment or even disinterest, but internally it's something else. It's a constant evaluation. Does this make sense? Is this real? Is this where I want my attention to go? And that question, the one most people don't consciously ask, runs quietly in the background of everything, which means belonging is no longer automatic. It has to pass through a filter. Now there's a part of this that is genuinely valuable. People who experience this often develop high self-awareness, strong internal identity, resistance to social pressure, the ability to think independently. They are less likely to adopt beliefs just because others do, less likely to follow momentum blindly, less likely to confuse familiarity with truth. That's real. That matters. But there's also a part that's worth looking at more carefully, because the same mechanisms that create independence can also create distance. The same awareness that protects you from losing yourself can keep you from fully entering anything. The same ability to stand apart can become a habit of staying apart. And this is where the question shifts. Not why don't I belong, but where am I choosing not to? Because not every instance of feeling out of place is purely structural. Some of it is pattern, learned, repeated until it feels like identity. If you've spent enough time observing instead of engaging, it becomes your natural position. Safer, more controlled, less exposed, but also less involved. Belonging at its core requires a degree of risk, not dramatic risk, but the willingness to enter something without fully analyzing it first, to participate before you understand everything, to allow yourself to be seen without complete control over how. And for a mind that values clarity, that's not easy, because uncertainty feels inefficient, even dangerous. So you stay just slightly outside, understanding everything, but not fully inside anything. There's a moment worth paying attention to. It's subtle. It happens when you're in a room, in a conversation, in a situation, and you feel that familiar distance. that quiet sense of not quite being part of it. Most of the time, the reaction is automatic. You lean back internally, observe, wait for it to pass. But what if in that moment, instead of stepping back, you stayed, not forcing anything? Not pretending, just staying. Letting yourself exist in the space without immediately analyzing your place in it. Because sometimes the feeling of being out of place isn't coming from the room. It's coming from the position you've learned to take inside it. This doesn't mean the feeling is wrong, or that every environment is right for you. Some spaces genuinely won't fit. Some people won't align. That's real. But not all distance is truth. Some of it is habit. So here's the question underneath everything. Is your sense of being out of place a reflection of who you are or a pattern of how you engage? If you're already deeply invested in something, a craft, a relationship, a path that requires your full presence, then what you're experiencing is likely clarity, a selective alignment. You don't belong everywhere because you're not meant to. But if you find that the distance exists everywhere with everyone in every context, then it might not be about the world. It might be about the position you've learned to hold within it. And positions can change, not instantly, not dramatically, but gradually through small shifts. Moments where you choose to stay a little longer, engage a little more directly, speak before fully editing the thought, allow something to be slightly imperfect. Because belonging isn't always something you find. Sometimes it's something you allow. So if you've spent most of your life feeling like you're on the outside of things, watching, understanding, but never fully inside, it doesn't mean you're missing something. It doesn't mean you were built wrong. It means your mind learned to prioritize awareness over immersion, clarity over comfort, observation over assumption. And that comes with both strengths and costs. The goal isn't to become someone who belongs everywhere. That was never realistic. The goal is to recognize where your distance is intentional and where it's automatic, because there's a difference between not belonging and never allowing yourself to find out if you could. And once you see that difference, something shifts, not dramatically, not all at once, but enough to step slightly closer, enough to test the edge, enough to realize you were never completely outside. You were just standing at a distance that felt familiar, and familiarity is not always the same thing as truth.